series. I'm Professor Boyd Craig, and I'm joined by my co-professor, Lord Michael Hastings, a member of the British House of Lords, who joins us today from the UK. We're also so pleased to have this series to share with you. It's sponsored by the Stephen R. Covey Leadership Center at the Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. It's our very special pleasure to welcome today our guest, Rachael Jarosh, who's the global CEO of a fantastic organization, Enactus. If you go to their website, their bold statement is, "We believe investing in students who take entrepreneurial action for others creates a better world for us all." I don't know how you could say it better. We're so inspired by our mission. Our students, Rachael, are very aware of Enactus and are involved in this project, so we couldn't be more thrilled to welcome you this morning. Thank you.
Well, I'm honored to be here and delighted to speak with you all today.
Thank you so much. You know, we've decided, Rachael, to surprise you. And we want to surprise you by sharing with you presentations that our students just submitted this week for the Enactus pitch competition. This is our initial foray into our work with Enactus. We couldn't be more thrilled or proud of it, our students. And so we wanted to share this brief 3-minute video with you so that you can see the work we're beginning to do. And following this presentation, I'm going to turn it to Lord Hastings, who will have the delight of interviewing you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
While living in the Dominican Republic, I met a man who told me that he spent 7 hours a day sitting on the grass in his front yard, chopping mindlessly at weeds, just wasting his time. He had no opportunity to work because there were not enough employment opportunities in his community. But this isn't because there's a lack of problems in the Dominican Republic. In fact, every year, 88 tons of plastic are used, and only 25% of that is managed. I saw this firsthand. There were plastic bottles everywhere. The only thing that stopped people like this man from solving problems like that was a lack of alignment of incentives. The purpose of our project was to understand this project a little bit more so that we could help align these incentives.
This man is not alone. There are thousands of Dominicans without access to good, meaningful work. Countless Dominicans live in poverty, many have extremely low wages, and very few have the most basic education to find better work. For our project, we wanted to unleash the Dominicans' potential to solve the problem of waste and unemployment. As Angelica Fuentes said, we want to give people the tools, the know-how, and the training to achieve whatever they want to achieve in their lives.
We found plans detailing how to upcycle much of those used bottles. Water heaters are created using plastic bottles and tubing, helping to clean the streets and create jobs.
We wanted to give this opportunity to Dominicans as a way to develop their entrepreneurship and leadership skills while also providing energy in the form of hot water for lower middle class Dominicans who otherwise could not afford it.
We are able to provide employment for these people in 3 ways. First, by paying them to collect these water bottles off of the streets. Second, by hiring them in order to assemble these water heaters. And third, hiring them as sales representatives in order to sell these water heaters. And ultimately, we want to be able to hire them as leaders in the company in order to run the company by themselves. We plan to be able to do this by partnering with Leader.org and Plastic Bank.
All in all, our main goal is to transition completely to local Dominican leadership through these goals. And our long-term vision is to improve wages and working conditions for these Dominicans by lowering that poverty rate from 56% down to 20% through teaching leadership and business skill classes and helping them through the process. We also plan to reduce this plastic waste and change that from 25% and bring it up to 60% that is managed, all while making hot water accessible to Dominicans. We're excited for this opportunity and hope you will join the cause. Thanks.
Well, there we are. And we're proud of our students. Very proud of our students. They had just 2 weeks to pull that together. And this is their first foray into the Enactus great field. So Rachel, what did you think about that?
Well, first of all, congratulations and welcome to Enactus. I'm so happy you're a part of our organization and learning and doing the great work that we all aspire to do together. There were a few things that jumped out at me right away. First of all, I loved the teamwork across the presentation, loved seeing each of you present, focused on a different part of the problem and the solution. And I also loved that you're thinking already about partnerships that can help advance your work. You know, I say all the time, we are all aspiring to advance the Sustainable Development Goals, but my favorite one is number 17, partnership. And we all know nothing works without it. Certainly entrepreneurs cannot be successful without key partnerships. So kudos to you. It's kind of astonishing, frankly, that you were able to pull that together in just 2 weeks. I'll be anxious to follow the progress and hear how we can help you and perhaps connect you to other Enactus teams around the world who have undertaken similar projects to see what you might glean from them through Enactus Plus.
Now, Rachel, you've been around with Enactus a good while. Before you became chief executive, you were also supporting and serving the organization on the board. And you've been around the world seeing constantly what students can do. Where do you think this instinct in students comes from to be so transformative?
Well, we have a lot of debate about this, whether it's nature or nurture, that instinct to want to drive transformational change. And at the end of the day, I think it's driven from empathy. And I don't know if you all will agree, and I'd be curious to know your reaction, but to identify a problem is one skill set, and it's a critical one. You cannot we measure what we treasure, shall we say. So identifying the problem is really critical, but the instinct to want to drive to transformational change takes courage and takes empathy. And those are two of the most common traits we see across all of our students globally. You may know already that we measure and study our students every year and ask you directly, what is it that's important to you? What issues are most concerning to you? And how are you prioritizing them going forward? And that insight is very helpful to us. But at the end of the day, when we ask about the traits most important and the traits we most frankly seek to help strengthen, it's empathy and courage.
Empathy and courage. Those are so powerful. We were just talking earlier in the class about empowerment and understanding what our why is, having listened to Simon Sinek on his TED Talk, getting to our why. And what you are seeing all over the world is students finding their why.
Correct. And that's actually this year why the Enactus World Cup theme will be passion on purpose, right? We all bring such passion and concern to our work at Enactus, but what is that purpose? What is that why? And how are we going to accomplish it? That's what we're really striving toward, all of us globally. And remember, you are joined by nearly 100,000 students worldwide in this endeavor. And so having a conversation around that why and the steps that we take to get to that why. Some of us get there earlier in life than others, but the steps that we take are so critical. So I really am delighted that you're all on this journey with us.
So Rachel, what about your why? Because you, before becoming chief executive of Enactus and serving on the board, you had a wonderfully powerful career in law. You could have become an attorney general. You could have been at the epicenter of the legal system, and you wouldn't have had to stress yourself out going around the world being with students. What was your why? What's the story of your why?
It's a great question. Thank you. It's one that I love to share because I'm such a big believer in lifelong learning. My why I couldn't define until I was well into my late 30s, early 40s. And I saw my career path as a journey. And now in retrospect, it was a journey to that why. I grew up in a home raised by a refugee who had lived in 10 countries in 10 years as a child, and ultimately came to the United States seeking opportunity. And her experience, my mother's experience as a refugee, really formed how I thought about the world, how I thought about our responsibility to others. And when I studied law, it was my intent to use the law to somehow pursue and help define that why for myself. But I found very quickly that I wasn't satisfied as an attorney. And so I started a journey, a very purposeful journey to gain other skills and along the way, find a way to contribute to communities that were powerful for me. But ultimately, when I met Enactus, which was actually in 2008, so I do go back a few years, I sat with students in conversation about a very dynamic financial crisis at the time. But we ended up talking ultimately about what leads to macro changes and micro changes in economies. And at the end of the day, one young woman who I'll never forget and who I'm still very close to from the Ukraine said, at the end of the day, doesn't it all come down to the integrity of every individual in that system and their personal purpose? And it struck me that she had discovered that at the age of 18 through Enactus, and I was still searching for mine. And it was in that moment that I decided I wanted to do whatever I could to strengthen this organization. I had suddenly found my purpose, which is to bring all the skills I had gained through my professional journey in corporate life on Wall Street to this organization and ensure that this opportunity was available to as many people as possible.
So you would see being at Enactus as a big step on in your career, in your life. You're taking everything you'd already gained and known and understood, and you can funnel it now into spreading effectiveness and impact around the world.
Precisely. And that's why I often say it's the privilege of a lifetime to have this role. But I want to emphasize what was so valuable for me, which was one person in my formative years in my early career who helped me really understand and value not just the skills and traits that I gained from each part of my career journey, but also to start to define my why in terms of what I didn't want and what I did. Sometimes it's easier to know what isn't part of your value set, and that narrows it and allows you to get closer to your own personal value set. And that's what I gained from each step of my journey. And I'm so grateful for all of those skills, because it is now in this job that they marry so well together with my personal purpose and really bring a truly fulfilling role in my life.
I'm going to turn over to Professor Craig in a moment to ask you one or two questions, but let me just focus in on one thing you and I have talked about a number of times, especially in the last year, because you are chief executive of a big global organization, but you're also living in a city that's quite traumatized by a lot of pressure. And you haven't just chosen to stand back and observe the realities in Minneapolis. You've been involved. Just tell our students about how you've been involved.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And for context, so I live and was born in Minneapolis. I left the city for many, many years and came back in the last decade to live here full time. And obviously we know, I'm sure you're all deeply aware of the profound challenges that we are facing as a community, as a city, and as a region, certainly across the country as well. But for me, growing up in a very diverse environment, it was critical to me, and in part shaped by my mother's experience, again, as a refugee, to bring value to voices and perspectives from anywhere and everywhere. And that encompasses all of the issues that we're talking about with regard to racism. And so in Minneapolis, I've tried to lend my skill set and my passion wherever it can be applicable, whether that's through working with our mayor's office and our police department on a task force to open up conversation and to ensure that protesters' voices are heard appropriately and not set into some stereotypical category, or whether it's to counteract some of the protesters who've come to our city from other places in the country to make their voices heard, whether that has been productive or not, to channel that appropriately. It's a call to action right now for all of us, I think, and there are hard personal decisions for all of us to make about what that channel is. I continue to seek ways to be a contributor in a conversation that has long overdue, needs to happen, as well as to help be a part of a productive community going forward.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all your hard work. It really matters. Professor Craig.
Thank you, Rachel. As you know, our students are studying leadership.
Indeed.
How to become principled leaders in the world and to have real impact. And as I reflect on that, I go back to the place where Lord Hastings and I first met, which was in Johannesburg at a World Cup, Enactus World Cup. That was a very important event. And a few things struck me about that experience. It was my first World Cup. Obviously, the biggest was these students. The caliber, their intelligence, their passion, the level of their professionalism and their accomplishments in their entrepreneurial work in all over the world. So totally blew me away in terms of who they are and what they were accomplishing. But the other thing that struck me was the business leaders who were there. The sponsors of this event, leaders of some of the most respected, most influential organizations in the world who were there personally to oversee this event, to be judges and to be champions of these students. And I was wondering if you could give a little insight to our students. It's not only that these businesses and business people are doing good by sponsoring this effort, but I also understand that they're very interested in those students. And this just becomes a pipeline for employment and opportunity for these students into these organizations. Could you share with us perhaps what you've learned about what these business leaders are looking for most in these students as potential candidates for young leaders in their own companies?
Sure. That's a fantastic observation. Thank you for sharing it. And I'm so grateful you were at South Africa. I was as well. It was just before I accepted this new role. It was such an exciting experience. It was one of the most energetic Enactus World Cups I think we've ever hosted. And I hope to welcome you back this year.
Thank you.
To that end, I remember my first World Cup as well, again, as I mentioned, in 2008. And I remember being first, of course, impressed by the students as you were, and then so astonished by the business leaders who made time personally to spend 2 or 3 days, not just in the judging of the competition, but engaging with students. And through everything from our structured learning sessions, which we host throughout the days of that event, but also in the hallways. I saw lots of one-on-ones. And I made it a point at that point, and have continued to ask our leaders on a regular basis, why is it they're there? And what is it that draws them back? And time again, I hear one word come out. Well, actually two, but I merged them to one: courage and grit. It takes courage just to join this program. We recognize how much all of the students in Enactus today, are carrying on your own. You have full course loads. This year in particular, you're managing the dynamics of the pandemic. You may have part-time jobs. You have other obligations outside, and yet you are finding time to invest in this. And that alone sends a signal to potential employers and business leaders about your commitment to your own development and your willingness to take a bold step and try something that frankly may fail, right? We all know not all of these projects succeed, and there are a lot of good reasons for that, but it takes courage to do that, and grit. And grit is something that is intrinsic, but if we ask our students around the world with all of the translation issues around that word, it is something that resonates for so many students, because our students have to, and you're learning this now through your project, really display an inordinate amount of fortitude and persistence and focus on a goal. And those two things are really unusual. And they are things that allow you, when you enter your career pathway, whatever it might be, will allow you to become the most resilient leaders you can. And those are the two words that I hear over and over, whether it's from the CEO of a telecom company in South Africa or the CEO of one of the major 4 accounting firms. That's the reason they're there. They believe in those two traits. They believe that you have them, that you are displaying them, even if you don't feel as though those apply to you. You are displaying them right now through this project that you're undertaking. And those are traits that are really valued in the workplace, because they allow organizations to become dynamic and resilient. And certainly this last year taught us, better than anything probably in our history, certainly in the most recent history, about what corporations need to endure and companies and organizations of any size and type need to endure, and that's resilience and adaptability.
Wow, essential. Thank you, Rachael. Thank you for who you are and for your service and work and influence. We're so pleased and grateful to have you with us. So thank you. Back to you, Michael.
So let me ask you one other question, or maybe two. So you are at the moment writing a book.
I am indeed.
And it's going to be a very important story. Just tell our students about the story.
You're very kind to ask. So among the many passions on purpose that I channel is a love of writing. And I mentioned briefly that my mother was a refugee during World War II, at a time when the world was obviously in upheaval. And this story that I'm focused on is her story. It's essentially the narrative of 2 million people who were deported during that time and cast out to refugee camps around the world. The reason I think that story is important to tell is, number one, it's a piece of history that's never been documented. But number two, more importantly, all of our families, whether we were refugees or recent migrants, whether we've been in a country or a place for centuries, have family histories that pass through us and come to life in our own lives in ways that we may not recognize. And I want to inspire people to tap into those hidden stories of your family and see the strengths in them. So for example, in my family, the book I'm writing is told through the voice of a woman. The woman, the main character, is a composite of hundreds of refugees who lived through what my mother and grandmother lived through. And in our family, we often joke about stubbornness. And we joke about why that might not be a great trait to have. Certainly over the dinner table, it came up a lot as I was growing up. But stubbornness is a corollary to some of the key traits that allowed my grandmother to persist in ensuring that her daughter didn't starve to death in this terrific and horrific traumatic journey as a refugee. Stubbornness is the reason that my mother was able to be successful when she came to America. It's tied closely to that word I just used, grit, but there are hidden traits in these traumatic experiences that if we can ensure we take time to reflect on, become hidden strengths as well. And that's what I want to tap into through this story. So I'll be telling the story of 2 million refugees from 1940 to 1948 through the voice of a few women who survived that trek. But in the interim, but at the same time, hoping to inspire people to examine their own histories and find the strengths embedded in prior generations so that they can see them going forward.
That's a wonderful undertaking. Well, thank you, Rachael, for joining us today on this series, The World's Principled Leaders. Thank you for you being an inspiration, just because you've drawn out that story from your mother and your grandmother and the family. But also thank you so much for leading Enactus to be so much bigger than anybody ever thought it could be, to be in the forefront. Yeah, right in the forefront of change. And we're proud of our students who've joined the Enactus family, and they've joined it because you helped to create a brilliant organization that is respected, treasured, and empowering. And that empowering is the center of who you are and what you do. Thank you so much, Rachael, and thank you for being part of our class.
Then my honor to join you. I want to just say that should any of you want to reach out to learn more about Enactus or to understand how you can connect with other Enactus students, which is one of the joys of being part of this global community, please don't hesitate to email me directly. Both Professor Craig Boyd and Lord Hastings have my contact information. I welcome it, and it's one of the great privileges of this job to connect directly with students who are searching to funnel their passion on purpose as well. So again, thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Good luck with your project.
See you in a few